Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel with Right Side Blonde. I hope you're all having a fantastic summer. It is the first week of July, so I thought I would pull out some very patriotic covers to show off behind me. I also wanted to highlight some interesting things I found in the July 1998 issue of George. To begin this week's episode, I wanted to read John Kennedy's editor's letter, and I think this was a very, very tasteful way of admitting that maybe he made a mistake. And this could be used as a lesson for a lot of today's media, just my opinion. It says, "Dear reader, some weeks ago we learned that a writer for a number of national magazines had fabricated portions of articles he had written. One such article appeared in the April issue of George. The piece was a profile of Washington attorney Vernon Jordan that focused on his relationship with President Clinton. It was prompted by Mr. Jordan's January press conference during which he explained his actions regarding Monica Lewinsky. It has since come to our attention that significant portions of this piece appear to be false. I say appear because the concocted portions are skillfully woven in among material that has previously been reported or that we can confirm independently. It is thus difficult to separate the fact from the fiction. What I can tell you is that the writer forged backup documentation for quotes in certain scenes when supporting evidence was requested by our fact-checkers, and we didn't catch it. As editor-in-chief, I am ultimately responsible for the content of this magazine. It is a responsibility I welcome, both when our work succeeds and in this case, when it falls short of our standards. I regret any distress caused to Mr. Jordan by the publication of falsehoods contained in our story. It is important that you understand our commitment to ensuring that this sort of breakdown does not happen again. Hopefully, some good has come out of this period of self-scrutiny, and it will make us a better and fairer magazine as we go forward." John Kennedy. I thought that was really cool. He took responsibility. It's just a concept that doesn't happen much these days anymore, so it was a bit refreshing. The main article I wanted to read today is called Confessions of an Ex-Flag Burner. It's by Naomi Wolf, and it's in the American Dream section of this issue of George. "When it comes to patriotism, the left has been too cool to care. But after years of being outmaneuvered by the right, it's time to change our ways. A call to action that begins at home. I'm always a little embarrassed when Independence Day rolls around. I get these patriotic feelings, but then I blush as I catch myself. After all, we liberal progressives have been dismissive of patriotism for years. The last persuasive patriot was Ronald Reagan, who deftly appropriated the language of national pride while making it synonymous with conservatism. These days, overt patriotism tends to look like this. Right-wing moral majority types fuming at some hapless artist funded by the NEA, or militants wearing jingoistic t-shirts when we're carpet bombing some far-off country. As the right was usurping the language of patriotism, we on the left were surrendering it. For the cool liberal activist type, such flag-waving has long seemed a bit thick-headed, and with the left's passionate embrace of multiculturalism, liberal patriotism became practically an oxymoron. As we discarded the notion of one America in favor of many Americas, it got harder to imagine which America we were celebrating. That this liberal abandonment was premature is nowhere more evident than in the debate over bilingualism. With a furor erupting over whether English should be mandated as the official U.S. language, and with Latinos set to become the largest minority in the next 20 years, it's time for a new progressive frame around struggles to unify the country. In 1995, state court judge Samuel Kaiser of Amarillo, Texas, chastised a bilingual mother, Marta Laureano, during a custody suit because she spoke to her 5-year-old daughter only in Spanish. If your daughter starts first grade and cannot speak the language that the teachers and the other children speak, and she's a full-blood American citizen, you're abusing that child. You're relegating her to the position of a housemaid, he said. His remarks provoked an outcry among Hispanic leaders who demanded that the judge step down. But plenty of liberals must have read those comments with a silent shock of recognition. A number of them employ immigrant women, who, despite intelligence and ambition, must resort to domestic labor precisely because they can't speak English. The long-term segregation by language of many immigrant communities is a disturbing phenomenon. We are all impoverished when a significant minority of Americans cannot pursue opportunity." A screed written by Professor Mercedes Lynn Dariarte, a Latin American studies teacher at the University of Texas, is typical of the knee-jerk defense of crude multiculturalism. Proponents of an English-first agenda, she claims, tend to scapegoat foreigners and define those who are different as threats to national unity. Suggesting that the underlying issue is always a racist one, Uriarte argues that the English-first movement is using mythology and ignorance to promote its agenda. But bilingualism, as it has traditionally been defined by the left, is doomed. In Texas, after years of bilingual education, 13% of school children can't speak English. And in California, it's worse. A quarter of public school kids can't speak English. Suddenly, California's Proposition 227, a proposal to cut long-term bilingual schooling and replace it with a one-year intensive English course, doesn't seem so bad. Set for a June 2nd vote, at this writing, it is supported by 63% of California voters, including 50% of Hispanics, who are fed up with their kids' slow progress in English. The initiative has been highly politicized by both sides. The National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, a coalition of at least 20 large Hispanic organizations, sees Proposition 227 as a political attempt to suppress the emerging Latin electorate, while Governor Pete Wilson has pushed the proposal to appease his anti-immigrant constituency. President Clinton has split the difference and called for a free 3-year course of English study instead. Why are some leaders so defensive about politics that promote cultural assimilation? When I was 5, I was one of the few Caucasians in a public school class that included Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, African American, and Mexican kids. Our textbooks spoke of America as a melting pot, and I recall having loved that image. It meant that all the kids around me, no matter how superficially different we were from one another, were on a deeper level inseparable. It suggested the melting of emotions, a warmth or kindness in the connection. By the time I was 12 or so, that metaphor had been replaced by the salad bowl analogy. We were now an assemblage of completely diverse ingredients that made up a whole, supposedly without losing one iota of a separate identity. While the metaphor was politically correct, it was an emotionally chilly image by contrast. Multiculturalists argued that though a melting pot America was a nice idea, it was a fantasy, that the cultural merging could never be an equal one, for the dominant white male culture would inevitably subsume other minority cultures. Hence, multiculturalists insisted that the barriers around distinct subcultures be respected. Many on the left, however, worship those barriers for their own sake. Through this paradigm, even imaginative empathy across racial, ethnic, or gender lines becomes suspect. On liberal college campuses, many black students dismiss the possibility of interracial solidarity with the phrase, "You can never know what it's like to be black," while women disparage men with, "You can never know what it's like to be a woman." After those blanket assertions, further conversation tends to break down, just as it has now on a national level, as the halting progress of the President's Council on Race has shown. But what about using the furor over the California referendum to move us a step closer to cultural inclusiveness? Although the U.S. has been able to develop a national identity in the absence of an official religion and language, it's hard to deny the role of a common tongue in creating a sense of national cohesion. This unity is what we stand to lose if we let ourselves be held hostage by those on both the left and the right who want to make capital of our differences. A brave politician will acknowledge that a common language serves the common good and will spearhead a national intensive drive to establish free, total immersion English courses for anyone, child or adult, daytime or evening. Our model could be the Alpan, the government-sponsored intensive language course in Hebrew that Israel has used with great effect to promote assimilation among its immigrants. Within 6 weeks, new Israeli immigrants from countries as diverse as Ethiopia and Holland are speaking together in the same language. Why shouldn't we do that as well? The irony is that a holistic view of ethnic or cultural relations is not a new concept. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed everyone at once. Everyone, even whites and even his enemies, was part of his us. For this 4th of July, let's go back to King's vision. From a progressive standpoint, multiculturalism holds out no hope of creating a whole. And let's say goodbye to bilingualism, which privileges separate languages at the expense of promoting a truly national conversation. It's hard to have a conversation when we're constantly focusing on our differences rather than focusing on what we all have in common, which is that we're all Americans. I'm so glad that Martin Luther King Jr. came along and gave us the blueprint of coming together. And I really think that we should set our sights on his vision for our America for the future. The next page I wanted to highlight was about the things that we fear. In a national poll, Americans told George what they find terrifying. The results show that we are more troubled by one another and our government than we are by anything outer space may throw our way. Like last week's episode, I'll put this up on the screen so you can pause and take your time to read the results. And lastly, I'm not going to take the time to read this article because it's very long and I've already read enough. But I did want to show you one little blurb from this Who Will Survive article. It says, experts say the U.S. is likely to be attacked by terrorists and the government has chosen which citizens it wants to protect. Interesting. Maybe in the future I'll highlight that article when I have more time. In closing, please like, subscribe, comment if you would like, and find me on the other platforms just in case one of them goes down for a short time. I hope you all had a fantastic 4th of July and came out of it with a renewed sense of patriotism and fire. A lot's going on right now, and I think that all of us are feeling that intensity rise. So keep up the positivity, keep up the camaraderie, and I think good things are definitely on their way. I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode of the George Collection. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.
George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.